There's a reason your Harley dealer never hands you a real-world maintenance checklist when you leave the showroom. Experienced technicians know dozens of small tricks that can prevent expensive repairs, yet most never make it onto a service invoice. We tracked down 12 of the most useful secrets from career Harley mechanics, simple checks and fixes you can handle yourself. And number 1 could explain a problem your bike has been warning you about for months. Number 12. Wet sumping and why your bike smokes on the first start of the day. If your Harley pukes a cloud of blue smoke out the exhaust the first time you fire it up in the morning, then runs perfectly clean for the rest of the day, most riders assume it is burning oil and needs a top-end rebuild. Almost every time, that is the wrong diagnosis. Harley engines use a dry sump oiling system, which means the oil tank sits separate from the crankcase, and a scavenge pump is supposed to pull oil back out of the engine after every ride. The check ball in that scavenge system wears out or gets a speck of debris stuck in it, and oil slowly siphons down into the crankcase overnight instead of staying in the tank where it belongs. By morning, you have a crankcase half full of oil, and the first start pushes that excess straight through the rings and out your exhaust as smoke. Mechanics call this wet sumping, and dealers love charging for a full valve job when the actual fix is a $15 check valve or a scavenge pump inspection. Before you let anyone touch your top end, pull the dipstick the morning after your bike has sat overnight. If the oil level reads way above full, you found your smoke. There is also a manual workaround experienced owners use before a long storage period. Pulling the plugs and turning the engine over a few times with the ignition off pushes the excess crankcase oil back up through the return line before it has a chance to sit and pool overnight, which is a habit worth building if your bike sits more than a few days between rides. Now that we know why the bike smokes cold, here is the part of the engine that starts making noise the moment you hit the key. Now let's shift gears. Number 11. The compensator click that dealers write off as normal. Twin Cam and Milwaukee 8 Harleys have a compensating sprocket between the crankshaft and the primary chain, and its entire job is to absorb the shock of the engine firing so it does not slam the drivetrain every time a piston fires. When that compensator starts to wear, you get a distinct metallic clicking or rattling right at idle, usually loudest in neutral with the clutch out. A huge number of riders get told this is just normal Harley clatter, and a huge number of dealers are happy to let that myth live because a compensator failure caught early is a $200 part and an hour of labor. Ignored, the compensator can shear completely, and when it does, it can take the primary chain and cover with it, turning a cheap fix into a full primary teardown. The test is simple. Put the bike in neutral, hold the clutch out, and listen right at the primary cover while it idles. A rhythmic click that matches engine speed, not exhaust pulses, is your compensator talking to you. The compensator lives inside the primary, and the fluid inside that same primary is the next thing almost nobody actually checks correctly. But we're not done yet. Number 10. Primary chain oil level, and why the sight glass lies to you. Every Harley with a chain primary has a small round inspection window on the primary cover, so you can check the oil level without opening anything up. Here is what almost every rider gets wrong. You are supposed to check that level with the bike sitting level, the engine cold, and the motorcycle left undisturbed for several minutes so the fluid can settle back into the primary case after draining away from the chain and clutch basket. Check it immediately after a ride while everything is still warm, and the sight glass can show a level that looks perfectly acceptable when the actual amount of fluid in the primary may be lower than you think. That matters because the primary chain depends on proper lubrication to control heat, friction, and wear. Run it chronically, low, and the chain can begin stretching much faster than it should, while the additional slack allows it to slap and hammer against surrounding components. Over time, that stretched chain can start damaging the clutch basket and inner primary cover from the inside, turning what should have been a simple fluid level check into a much more expensive repair. A few minutes spent checking the level correctly can save you from chasing a drivetrain problem that developed quietly over thousands of miles. The correct habit is to check it cold, first thing before you ride, not after you park. While we are talking about things that only show their true condition when the engine is dead cold, your charging system has the exact same blind spot. The next one fills in the gaps. Number 9. Stator failure and the heat soak nobody tests for. Harley stators sit right behind the primary cover, wrapped around the crankshaft, which means they run constantly bathed in engine heat with almost no airflow to cool them. A stator that tests fine on a multimeter when the engine is cold can fail completely once it heats up on a long ride, because the windings expand and a hairline short only opens up under heat. This is why so many riders get stranded on hot summer rides with a dead battery light, get the bike towed, and then have the shop test it cold and find nothing wrong. The real test a mechanic uses is checking alternating current output voltage from the stator with the engine at full operating temperature, not simply measuring it at idle in the driveway while everything is cold. A stator can appear perfectly healthy during a quick cold test because the internal windings and insulation have not yet reached the temperatures that expose a developing fault. As the engine runs and heat builds, a weakened winding can begin losing efficiency, causing the stator's output to fall even though the motorcycle still starts and runs normally. That is why a charging system that passes a 5-minute driveway check can still leave you stranded after a long ride. If your charging voltage drops noticeably after 20 minutes of highway riding compared with the reading from a cold start, treat that change as a serious warning. The stator may be breaking down internally as it heats up, and eventually it can stop producing enough power to keep the battery charged. By the time the problem becomes obvious from a dead battery or charging warning, the underlying stator failure may already be well advanced. There is a second layer to this most riders never learn. A stator that runs slightly too hot for too long usually points to a failing voltage regulator underneath it, since the regulator is what controls how hard the stator gets worked. Replacing a stator without checking regulator output first is why some riders end up buying the same part twice in one riding season. A failing stator eventually starves your battery, but there is a completely separate reason Harley batteries die early that has nothing to do with charging at all. This next one often gets ignored.
Before we continue, there's a reason most of this is knowledge a dealership would rather bill you for by the hour. The complete field archive goes where this channel can't. The full playbook, uncut. The habits that keep a bike on the road for decades, and the thousands they save you. The code on your screen gets you in. Scan it, and let's get back to the bike.
Number 8. The ground strap corrosion that mimics a dead battery. Harleys route a huge amount of their electrical system through a single frame ground strap, usually located near the battery or the transmission. That strap sits exposed to road salt, rain, and vibration, and the connection point corrodes from the inside out even when the outside looks clean. A corroded ground strap creates resistance in the entire electrical system, which shows up as slow cranking, dim headlights at idle, or a battery that seems to die overnight even though it tests fine on a charger. Riders replace perfectly good batteries 2 and 3 times, chasing this problem because nobody thinks to pull the ground strap and clean the actual contact surface underneath the terminal, not just wipe the outside. Pull it, scrape it back to bare metal, and reseat it with dielectric grease, and electrical gremlins that have haunted a bike for a year can disappear in 10 minutes. A quick way to confirm it before you even pull anything apart is a voltage drop test across the strap while cranking the engine. Anything more than a few tenths of a volt dropped across that single connection means real resistance is hiding there, even if the strap looks clean on the outside. Electrical grounds are one hidden failure point, but the clutch system has its own version that most riders adjust completely wrong. The pattern continues. Number 7. Clutch cable free play and the setting that ruins your plates early. Most Harley owners adjust their clutch cable free play by feel, pulling the lever until it feels about right and calling it done. There is an actual spec for this, and getting it wrong in either direction quietly destroys your clutch. Too little free play means the clutch never fully engages, so the plates are always slipping slightly, even when you think the clutch is out, which glazes the friction plates and burns them prematurely. Too much free play means the clutch never fully disengages, so you get grinding into gear and drivetrain lash. The correct method is to check free play at the hand lever, not simply at the cable adjuster down at the transmission. You want roughly 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch of lever movement before you begin to feel resistance from the clutch mechanism. That small amount of slack is critical because it allows the clutch to fully engage when the lever is released, while still giving the release mechanism enough travel when you pull the lever in. Too little free play can leave the clutch partially disengaged even when your hand is off the lever, creating constant slip, heat, and accelerated friction plate wear. Too much can prevent the clutch from fully disengaging when you pull the lever, making shifts harder and putting additional stress on the transmission. Most riders have never actually measured this clearance during the years they have owned the bike. They adjust the lever until it feels comfortable and assume everything is fine. That simple habit is one of the most common reasons a clutch can wear out prematurely, despite the motorcycle having relatively low mileage. A clutch that never fully disengages puts extra strain on something else riders rarely think about, which is the belt final drive. And that wasn't the only change. Number 6. Belt tension and the deflection number nobody checks properly. Belt drive. Harleys need a specific amount of slack, and the belt is meant to be checked cold, unloaded, with the bike on the side stand, using actual deflection measurement rather than pressing on it with your thumb and guessing. A belt that is too tight puts constant load on your transmission main shaft bearing and the rear pulley bearing, wearing both out years before they should fail. A belt too loose will jump teeth under hard acceleration, and a jump tooth under load can shred the belt entirely at highway speed. The correct method uses a deflection gauge or even a fish scale pulling the belt a set distance and reading the force required, checked at the tightest point of rotation since belt tension varies as the wheel turns. Riders who eyeball this are almost always running it too tight because a loose feeling belt makes people nervous, and that constant over-tightening is exactly what quietly kills transmission bearings on bikes with otherwise low mileage. As a general reference point, most touring and dyna platforms want somewhere close to a half an inch of deflection under light thumb pressure at the tightest point. But the number varies enough by model and year that checking your specific service manual value takes 5 minutes and saves you a bearing job that runs well into 4 figures at a shop. Belt tension protects your transmission bearings, but there is a completely different bearing on the bike that fails from something riders do to themselves without realizing it. But there's another side to this. Number 5. Steering head bearings and the security cable trick that hides a real problem. Riders who park with the front wheel turned hard to one side and loop a security cable through the forks are unintentionally loading the steering head bearings against the same contact point every single time the bike sits. Over months, this wears a tiny divot into the bearing race directly at that one position. The result is a steering head that feels perfectly smooth everywhere except one exact spot, usually straight ahead, where the bars feel like they want to fall into a notch or get slightly heavy. This gets misdiagnosed constantly as a tire or alignment issue because the motorcycle can still steer perfectly well at normal road speeds. The problem often becomes noticeable only when the bike is stopped or moving at very low speed. When you turn the bars through the center and feel a slight notch, resistance, or hesitation that was not there before. What is happening is that years of repeated loading can cause the steering head bearings to develop wear concentrated around the same position, particularly when the motorcycle is frequently parked with the front wheel facing the same direction. Once that damage develops, the proper fix is a full bearing and race replacement, which means disassembling the front end and turning a simple preventative issue into a real repair. The prevention, however, costs nothing. Alternate which direction you turn the bars when you park, or simply straighten the front wheel before locking the bike up. That spreads the load across a larger portion of the bearing race, instead of repeatedly hammering the same contact point for years. Speaking of parts that fail from repetition rather than one big event, your rear brake has one of the worst offenders on the entire bike, and now the pattern becomes a lot clearer. Number 4. Rear caliper pin seizure and the brake drag nobody notices until it is expensive. Harley rear calipers use floating pins that let the caliper slide as the pads wear, and those pins are exposed to road grime, salt, and heat right behind the rear wheel. When a pin seizes even partially, the caliper cannot retract fully after you release the brake, so the pads keep dragging lightly against the rotor every single mile you ride. This does not throw a warning light and does not feel dramatic from the saddle. It just quietly overheats the caliper, cooks the brake fluid, and eats through pads at 2 to 3 times the normal rate. Mechanics check for this by feeling the rear rotor for excess heat right after a ride with light braking, not hard stops. A rotor that is noticeably hotter than the front after gentle riding means a pin is dragging. Pulling the pins twice a year, cleaning them, and repacking with the correct high-temperature brake grease is the entire fix, and it is almost never on anyone's maintenance checklist. A dragging rear brake wastes fuel and eats pads slowly, but the next one on this list can strand you completely without a single warning sign first. And this next one explains everything. Number 3. The fuel strainer sock that clogs from the inside of the tank. Inside every Harley fuel tank, the fuel pump module has a fine mesh strainer sock wrapped around the pickup, and its job is to keep tank debris out of the injectors. Over years, rust flakes from the inside of steel tanks and fine sediments slowly clog that sock from the outside in. The symptom is brutally specific and throws people off every time. The bike runs perfectly at idle and at low speed, then bogs, sputters, or dies specifically under sustained high demand, like holding highway speed for several miles or hard acceleration on the interstate. That is because the clogged sock can still flow enough fuel for low-demand riding. It just cannot keep up once the pump needs to move real volume. Riders chase this as an ignition problem or a fuel injection problem for months because it never happens in the driveway or around town, only on the highway. It also tends to show up worse when the tank is below a quarter full, because a lower fuel level exposes more of the clogged sock and gives the pump even less clean fuel to draw from, which is why some riders swear the problem comes and goes depending on how recently they filled up. The strainer sock is a $20 part, but almost nobody checks it because it requires dropping the fuel pump module out of the tank, which most riders assume only a dealer can do. A fuel delivery problem hides inside the tank, and this next issue hides inside a switch most riders have never once thought about. And then this happens. Number 2. The clutch and side stand safety switches that cause a no start for the wrong reason. Harleys will not let the starter engage unless the clutch lever is pulled in and the side stand is up, using small switches wired into that circuit. Both switches sit exposed to weather, and both develop internal corrosion that creates an intermittent connection rather than a clean failure. The result is a bike that sometimes cranks fine and sometimes does absolutely nothing when you hit the starter button, with zero pattern that makes sense. No clicking, no dash lights, nothing. Riders start assuming it is the starter relay, the battery, or the starter motor itself, and some end up replacing all three before anyone checks these two switches. It gets worse in cold or wet weather, since moisture inside the switch housing makes the intermittent contact even less predictable, which is exactly why so many of these no-start complaints show up in the same riders' garages every single autumn and spring without anyone connecting the pattern. The actual test takes 30 seconds. Wiggle the clutch lever slightly while holding the starter button, and separately try starting with the side stand fully up versus barely up. If the bike catches at one exact position and not another, you have found a failing safety switch, not a failing starter. And that brings us to the one thing on this entire list that experienced mechanics check first on every single Harley that rolls into the shop, before they touch anything else. And this next one explains why. Number 1. Isolator mount cracking, and the vibration that is actually a warning. Harley engines are rubber mounted to the frame through isolator mounts, specifically because the engine vibrates hard enough to shake a rigid frame apart over time. Those rubber isolators degrade with age and heat exposure, and when they start to crack internally, the bike develops a vibration that feels different from normal Harley rumble, usually described as a buzz that shows up at a specific RPM and disappears above or below it. Most riders live with this for years, assuming it is just how Harleys feel, when a failing isolator is actually allowing the engine to move slightly against the frame under load. Left long enough, this accelerates wear on every single thing bolted near the engine, from exhaust brackets to wiring harnesses that were never designed to flex that much. A mechanic checks this by putting a hand flat on the frame near each isolator while a second person revs the engine in neutral, feeling for a vibration that spikes hard at one specific point rather than building smoothly. Catching a cracked isolator early is a bolt-on part swap. Catching it late means chasing cracked brackets and chafed wiring all over the bike for months without understanding why they keep coming back. There is a quick visual check too. Shine a flashlight directly at the rubber where it meets the metal collar on each isolator, and look for a fine crack ring forming around the edge, since that ring is almost always visible months before the vibration itself becomes noticeable from the saddle. If this helped, subscribe, and we'll be back with another deep dive.